Hello and welcome to our Lent Reading series of 2023, considering people who encountered Jesus. Today we start the second half as it's day 21. And we're going to look today at the healing of a man with a shrivelled hand. But this one caused consternation amongst the religious leaders of the day as it took place on the Sabbath. The passage appears in a series of encounters between Jesus and the Pharisees about what can and can't be done on the Sabbath. Remembering from yesterday that the Pharisees believed that true worship revolved around the keeping of the commandments. Jesus enters a synagogue on the Sabbath, and a man with a shrivelled hand is there. The Pharisees are watching him. What would he do? Well, let's read the passage and we'll find it in Matthew chapter 12, starting at verse 9. Going on from that place, he went into the synagogue, and a man with a shrivelled hand was there. Looking for a reason to bring charges against Jesus, they asked him, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?" He said to them, "If any of you has a sheep and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will you not take hold of it and lift it out? How much more valuable is a person than a sheep? Therefore, it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath." Then he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." As he stretched it out, it was completely restored, just as sound as the other. It could seem from this passage that the man with the deformed hand may have been a setup, only in the synagogue by the request of the Pharisees to see if Jesus would break their understanding of the Sabbath. Though the Pharisees have a reputation for being obsessed with the law and legalistic in their interpretation, not all their motivation was about condemning people or highlighting their own perceived righteousness. Amidst it all, there was a concern not to offend God. Think of it this way. Imagine a Pharisee who's driving down the motorway. The law says the limit is 70 miles an hour, but he is concerned that he might accidentally speed, so he drives at 65 miles an hour. Then he thinks to himself, what if the speedometer in the car is inaccurate? I'd better go at 60 just in case, so I don't accidentally break the law. But then he thinks to himself again, what if I'm going downhill and I accidentally speed up? I might be at risk of breaking the law. I'd better go at 55 miles an hour just to be safe. Then another thought comes to him. What if I suddenly sneeze and step harder on the accelerator? Maybe I'd better go at 50 just to be sure. But then again, let's consider the worst case scenario. What if I sneeze going downhill with a dodgy speedometer? I might break the law. Best stay at 40. So there he is, pootling along at 40 miles an hour, when someone overtakes him at 60 miles an hour. He sneers and says, there goes a sinner who's got no regard for God's law. That gives an idea of how they often saw others in regard to the law. They would have endless debates such as, if carrying wood on the Sabbath breaks the law, what about carrying kindling for a fire? But if that breaks the law, what about walking with a twig caught in the fold of your robes? Or what about walking with a splinter in your finger? And then they would judge everybody else by their interpretation of the law, so that their zeal for God's law became a burden on the people. Jesus confronts their understanding. There is this man in the synagogue. He has a deformed hand. It is the Sabbath. Healing, according to the Pharisees, was classed as work. What would Jesus do? In the question that Jesus asked them about the sheep in the pit and the man in need of healing, he is effectively asking them a question: does compassion break the law or fulfill it? I would imagine the lack of a recorded answer suggests that they gave none and just stood in silence. Jesus then asked the man to stretch out his hand, and he is healed. The Pharisees had come to test Jesus, but in the end, he is testing them. James would later write about this in his letter. In the 2nd chapter from verse 12, he writes, "Speak and act as those who are going to be judged by the law that gives freedom, because judgment without mercy will be shown to anyone who has not been merciful. Mercy triumphs over judgment." That's something to reflect upon as we seek to honour God in the way we live. Until next time, have a blessed day.